Welcome to our breakout session on MOOP and LNT. We're probably going to pick up some more people as we get going, since we got a late break from the plenary address. But hopefully you enjoyed hearing from a bunch of our departments this morning. Heard a lot, especially just before the break, that MOOP map. We are here in this breakout session to talk about MOOP and Leave No Trace. Leave No Trace is incredibly important as one of our 10 principles. It's a cornerstone of our community and our community's culture, both on Playa and in the default world. It's also a requirement of our continued special event permit. So Leave No Trace is really important to the future of the Burning Man Big Burn event. It means that if we don't get our shit together and manage our MOOP, we potentially endanger the future of the event itself. So Leave No Trace is super important to Burning Man. Even if you're a dusty veteran or a longstanding camp, sometimes things go wrong. Last year was really hard with the weather, COVID, and people's exhaustion. And even if you as a camp have your MOOP plan dialed in, there are probably things that you can learn from other camps about what they do. Sometimes people do things differently, and particularly when we've been doing the same thing for many years, breaking into a new pattern can sometimes change things a lot for our participants. Ultimately, we are all responsible for Leave No Trace as a community, and the Leave No Trace of the entire community. So even though you may have a clear spot or a green spot on this year's MOOP map, we're also responsible for the places that were red. So we're hoping to make things better next year. We have some panelists today to talk about Leave No Trace and MOOP especially. And I'll introduce you to them. As I introduce you, if you would wave so that our participants know who you are, that'd be great. I'll start with myself. My name is Vesper Bell. I am our producer and host for the session today. I've been burning since 2014, and I camp with the Alternative Energy Zone, which is a village of no generators and only alternative energy, which mostly means solar, but occasionally people do some weird stuff with wind. I also volunteer with the camp support team and help produce the campfire talks over the course of the off season. On Playa, you can hear my disco brunch set on KAEZ radio. And if you come by my camp, Primal Oasis, you can get a mission from my Mission Machine art project. Also on our panel today, we have Nick Care Bear, who's with Burners Without Borders. He's their build lead and a regenerative designer and community builder, helping reconnect humans to land through his consulting practice, Regenerative Pathways. We also have Darwin with us. He's the lead for Water Temple, a daytime recovery and restoration camp that offers sound meditation, breath work, and yoga. Darwin has organized camps up to 350 people, and with a background in alpinism, Leave No Trace is close to his heart. Kyle Rocky Road is a founding member of the Leadership Council for Camp Contact and the Contact Collective Village. He guides the cultural, governance, and Leave No Trace teams. He is a philomath at heart. He likes to get his hands dirty in all sorts of ways and loves a juicy challenge. Outside of Burning Man, Kyle is an avid explorer, hiker, climber, conservationist, and a lover of all things outdoors. He runs an ESG-focused startup incubator, gives entrepreneurs the education, tools, guidance to build their businesses while ensuring a net positive impact for the 7th generation, founded on the bedrock principle of Leave No Trace, or LPT. We've got Red Bird Bean, Sarah, has been burning since 2018. and serves as a part of the leadership team of the Land of Monkey theme camp in the 730 sector. At Land of Monkey, she leads the burner success team that supports campmates who are having challenging moments on or off playa with peer support and supports conflict resolution efforts among members when needed. She's also part of RAT, Renewables for Artists team, supporting art projects on playa since in 2022 to use renewable power, and has volunteered extensively with virtual burns. It's part of the leadership team of the virtual events support team. As a member of the grant committee for Burner Network's grant honoraria program, and in the default world, Redbird Bean has been a professional nonprofit manager and fundraiser for over 20 years. It has recently changed professions to focus on building community and virtual spaces as a project manager and event specialist for the Big Rock Creative. A little bit later this afternoon, we're going to have Timothy Bookmark join us. He manages Burning Man's environmental compliance program. He and his team of staff and volunteers work closely with Playa Resto, Earth Guardians, and Black Rock Rangers and the BLM to identify, document, and rectify leave no trace issues across our city. Outside of his work with the org, Tim lives in San Francisco and manages a forest health and wildfire resilience program for the state of California. I'd also like to give a shout out and many thanks to our chat mod, who is Action Girl. She is a longtime burner and member of the Burning Man staff as a producer and publisher in the Philosophical Center. She's a communications manager and regional network manager and the past leader of Media Mecca. Thank you, Action Girl. All right. We heard in our DA's talk earlier today that wood has been dethroned as the #1 heavy hitter MOOP culprit on playa, but wood is still something that causes a lot of problems for MOOP and for camps. So first up, I'm going to introduce Care Bear to talk a little bit about wood.
Yay, wood. So I mean, I feel like I'm here invited as an advocate for wood. We build with wood at Burns Without Borders, and I think one of the reasons that we do, given that it has some negative connotations as well, is that, you know, as the build lead, I juggle a few different roles, and one of the things that I think, is the most truly magical gift that of the burn is witnessing people experience their own power and stepping into new roles and new skills. And I see wood and building with it as a really inclusive medium that it kind of universal, and people can kind of plug in at very, very different degrees. And as a build lead, I like to run a build that's not just about building a finished product, but actually the actual process of getting people on board. So that's one of the reasons why we use it. I think that, I was reflecting on this, what are the biggest kind of areas in which wood is an issue on playa is kind of, there's kind of 4 big ones that I kind of think about. One of them is kind of cutting wood or drilling it and just create a whole bunch of tiny little movements. It's a nightmare. The other one you kind of wouldn't think about it, but disintegration. And if you're using the same kind of wood over and over again, little pieces of it will ultimately fly off. And then this isn't directly related to wood, but fixing wood together, the fasteners that you use in drilling actually has a big role to play in how moopy or non-moopy we can do things. And I actually haven't seen the map for campus here, so I don't know what BWB got, but we do a fairly good job of working with wood. We've been doing this for a while, and so I was thinking about what are the strategies that we use to address all this. The first one, actually happens off playa, and that is just planning ahead and planning for reuse. We have built a structure that took me 2 years to kind of cobble the final design that we liked, and then we've been reusing that structure. The last year was, we basically redid it. We don't need to go bigger or better. We like the home that we have, and we want to get as much life out of those materials as possible. The other thing about planning ahead is just you can kind of do a whole bunch of, especially now with the emergence of kind of rapid fabrication, CNC machines, all this stuff. You can do a lot of off playa cutting, prepping. Obviously, your location matters. I built a costume call coming from New York, and that was a totally different experience than coming from the Bay Area doing Burners Without Borders. So obviously, not every camp has the access of being able to do that stuff, but also increasingly Reno is becoming a place and a hub for doing prefabrication and planning off playa. Once on playa, our biggest mitigation is that we have a contained space for doing all of our cuts and drilling. We use a shipping container. We are lucky to have one of those, but you could probably retrofit the back of a truck. You could do a contained tent with tarps on the ground. There's a lot of ways to be creative with that. We have a tarp going over the container, and we have a huge tarp outside on the ground to collect anything that would blow out of it. And we kind of just keep that regularly clean. And so a lot of the big heavy MOOP is happening in a contained space. The other thing, is screws. This is actually a huge one that when I was thinking about, kind of came up for me. I've gone through every year, and I pull out every Phillips head. And the reason that this is a problem is because when we have a lot of people out there that are maybe not skilled with drilling, you break heads, and then you can't reuse the piece, and there's a lot of there's a lot of waste as well as just mess that happens from using crappy fasteners. So I would just say stick to Star Drive. Really nice GRK fasteners. They're removable, they're reusable. We've gotten buckets and buckets of them, and sorting them is a great task for someone who's just like pooped and has had too much sun. So yeah, definitely upgrade your fastener game. It's just gonna make your life a lot better. And then to mitigate like disintegration, and I think someone's probably gonna talk about this, but when we break down, we say that next year's build starts with breakdown, and we do a really good job of inventorying all the materials that we have. And if there are pieces of wood or materials, of our camp that are breaking down, we take note of that or we pull it off, before next year. So you're not starting with a pile of crappy, broken and flaking materials. I guess that's the last piece. Around materials, I stick to primarily dimensional lumber and then fairly good grade plywood. If you're new to the plywood game, there's some stuff out there that's not really plywood. It's called OSB or particle board. That stuff is just like no go. Do not even consider it. And I would try to stick to 3/4 inch. You can get away with 1/2 inch, but that starts to warp and flake a little bit. And plywood can be one of those maybe the biggest guilty contributor for kind of flaking and disintegration on playa. I think those are the main kind of topics that came to me. And I guess, as I look forward to the future, we're looking to get maybe a couple more years out of our camp build, is to start looking at like modular construction. Playa Tech is something that is, pretty ubiquitous in terms of furniture. We have had the honor of getting a Greg Fleischman living structural statue donated to our camp. I love Greg. I will be honest, it's very hard to build, like figuring out how to put that whole house together. It just slots together. Takes probably as long as our entire frontage, which is quite a large endeavor. But I think that's the future that I'd like to see things going with wood. With wood is starting to really think intelligently about prefabrication and modular construction, that you can flat pack in containers or box trucks, even store out on playa, and kind of rebuild each year. And that's an even like lower barrier to entry for getting people on my build team to be able to plug in and help with camp. So with that is my conclusion on wood.
Yeah. I have a follow-up question for you. Do you seal your wood at all to kind of help prevent some of the desiccation flake off that happens with wood? I know that sometimes with paint, there's also some like paint plus wood may also equal boop. So what do you guys do?
It's a great question. We don't seal it. So yeah, that definitely could be an area to improve upon. I
Yeah.
did forget to mention, kind of, I was really talking about just like all the tactile uses of it. The other huge piece for us is just we have a MOOP czar on camp, and then we kind of every build shift we have at least one person in charge of MOOP. And so if you are having to do cuts or you're doing things, or you're beginning to build, pulling a whole bunch of material out of a container, we're just really attentive to it. And everyone's got a tool belt with a little MOOP bag on their tool belt, and we work with our MOOP czar to really make sure that our spaces are clean. And I would definitely say if you're working with wood, invest in really nice metal magnet rakes. Those things are lifesavers, both for people running around barefoot during the burn and as well for your LNT map scores.
Awesome. So to kind of summarize for Care Bear, wood actually has a lot of pros. It's really accessible. It's easy to work with, and it tends to be really nice looking when you're out on playa. There are types of wood that are more and less moopy. Be really conscious about the type of wood that you're choosing. And as Care Bear said, using really high quality fasteners helps ensure the longevity of your structure that you're building and your fasteners, and decreasing multiple types of MOOP. And you clean up as you go, and MOOPing particularly around the type of material that you're working with is just part of your work with that material. Cleaning up afterwards, cleaning as you go, and being really cognizant of the MOOP of wood. Well, thanks, Care Bear.
Well sung. Yeah, thank you so much for that.
Yeah. We're gonna hear from Darwin next. Darwin has a long history with alpinism and the outdoors, and can talk to us about how the things that we bring in our personal gear play a role in the MOOP that we leave behind. Darwin, hello.
Hello, everyone. My name is Darwin, and he, him. I'm talking today from Jackson Hole, Wyoming. These are ancestral grounds of the Arapaho and the Shoshone Nation. The thing I'd like to invite into everybody's mind first today is when we think about going and exploring the outdoors and exploring the wild, or going to a transformational event to hang out with all of our friends, it's important to remember that these are not things that are leave no trace inherently. We are going to leave a trace. We are going to impact the environments that we go to, especially in the mountains, as people know about new routes, or over 20 odd years of Burning Man, the population of the city gets bigger and bigger. Inherently, we are going to cause some destruction to that natural area. And I think facing that from the start, and thinking about that and putting that kind of like into the process of planning and packing for any event in the mountains or at Burning Man is important. One of the things that we talk about in alpinism, and I think is popular in backpacking and becoming more popular, is the idea of light and fast, or ultra light. How do you carry the least amount of things with you when you go into the backcountry, or hopefully to Burning Man? And that really kind of encompasses a goal. What is our goal and what are we doing? And to get that goal, there's success measures and there's certain things that we have to do in order there, but there's also things we have to plan for that we hope we might not have to use or might not happen. If you open my backcountry bag at the door right now, you'll find avalanche transponders and shovels and 850 fill down jacket that I haven't put on once this year, but I carry with me every time I go into the backcountry. So as we think about personal responsibility and camp responsibility, it's really important that we not only think about what is going to make our project or our camp successful from a leave no trace place, but also what are the things that we have to do if things don't go really well. I love the idea of a magnetic, rake or something to clean up, but this also boils down to, do we have the right things to clean up spills? Are we using heavy equipment? Do we have large generators that might require containment? Do we have a lot of RVs in our camp? And our communications, are we explaining to everybody how to do containment and what are the necessary measures to make sure that RV doesn't leave a larger footprint than it does? As build teams, are we creating things like cut boxes, hopefully sealed for all of our wood, as you heard before? And are we doing all the prep and planning off playa so we're not bringing extra materials or doing extra steps on playa that could then create MOOP? And I think that really, transfers to what we do in the outdoors and in the mountains as well, is that you want to plan for efficiency and you want to plan to have extra time and extra ability to run into problems. And this falls right into our MOOP. This year, I'm going to say that everybody really generally goes to the event and is trying their best, but we ran into weather. So one of the things we always have to plan for in every build strategy, every day in the mountains, is we have to look at the weather. We have to say, what's going to be happening while we're out there and what type of things do we need to bring to protect ourselves from that. For us managing large projects or large camps, you're going to put a factor on the size of your camp or the size of your project that says, if we're pre-building and we know how long it takes to build this thing, we might lose a day or two for wind and for dust storms, where we just have to shut down on both the front end, on the back end. So how are we building in extra time to clean up those messes, to take care of a situation that has gone awry in our camp or in our personal ability? When we're managing camps and when we're managing ourselves, I think it's really important that I can only imagine what the Amazon driver in Reno thinks about Burning Man. The UPS and FedEx guys, I'm sure, just like absolutely know when the event's happening. So requesting to our camp members and of ourselves, all packing materials, all extra trash, anything that you can do to break down and take things, into recycle centers and into proper ways of disposal before you get to the playa is essential. The ability to pack and prepare things in an efficient manner. If you have a project, labeling bolt boxes, labeling tool areas, labeling your light bin, or, one of my favorites is, packing outfits in separate bags so they stay clean, but they're also efficient and give you the time and the space to help others, to help your projects, and to make things go in a successful way, even when things might not be going, in a successful way for the person next to you or for the camp. I think personal responsibility in playa is now really turning into personal responsibility in a team concept. No matter whether you're going to Burning Man on your own and camping on the back streets, or you're entering that gate to join a camp of 350 people, we all need to think, like when we go into the mountains or enter the gate of Yosemite, that you are going as a group of participants of 80,000, or you are going into Joshua Tree National Park as a participant of 2 million. So the things that you do and the way that you carry yourself is going to be seen, reflected, and exponentiated by that mass of people. So really important to, carry the right things. Don't use glitters and things on your outfit. Make sure that you're, cleaning up responsibly everything that happens in public so that, people do the same. We have to set an example, and not just for ourselves and for our camp, but for all burners, because I think the life of this festival is going to hit its limit with things like this Burning Man map. And, I'll finish and take any questions on the fact that, the Black Rock Desert in the base of the Calico Mountains is a beautiful place and probably would have done a lot better if none of us would have showed up to have a good time and to have transformation. Where we can make up for this is by taking the lessons we learn on playa and taking them off and applying them into everyday society to make the world a better place. But there's going to be a nexus if we can't take care of ourselves on playa, where that just doesn't make sense anymore.
Yeah. Thanks, Darwin. I really appreciate the last point there about leave no trace and leave no trace on playa and leave no trace in default being intertwined. There was a lot of talk over this last year about how maybe we forgot how to do this in the intervening years. And if we practice leave no trace in the default world, it's a lot easier to practice leave no trace when we get to the playa. I also want to highlight something that Darwin said about preparing for playa with tools and making sure that we build in contingency in our plan and in our tools for bringing what we need and being really thoughtful about what would we need if things go wrong. And that kind of segues us into our next two panelists as well. I'm going to pull up Rocky Road. Rocky Road, you are the strike lead for your camp. What do you guys usually do in your MOOP and strike process?
Hey everyone, Vesper, thanks for the introduction, and I'm excited to be here and talk to everyone about this because there's so much we can do, and such an important process, an important component of our entire Burning Man experience. I want to highlight something that Darwin also said as well, which is about taking what we do here at Burning Man and bringing it everywhere. I think that underpins essentially why I've been strike lead or participated in strike in most of my years at Burning Man. So part of our process is about understanding the scope of what we're doing. So for us, we are a village, and that village comprises over 600 people and 160,000 square feet. That can be summed up at we're about half the size of a regular Burning Man block. So that's a lot of area to cover for a village. And that's a lot of MOOP. And if everyone contributes 1% more or less MOOP in a year for us, that is basically a day of time for our MOOP and our LNT team to clean up afterwards. So so culture is our first main component. Everyone participates, and everyone has, especially during build and during strike, let's say they have a MOOP pocket or a MOOP bag they use. And part of that cultural piece we do is we have an open door policy. And if anyone walks over some MOOP or drops some MOOP, we kindly say to the person, hey, I noticed you dropped a feather or something, and could you grab that? And what it does is it helps us build accountability in a kind manner for everyone. So we're all held accountable, and we're all held accountable for our mindfulness about, because in the normal course of every day, and this is something that Darwin was mentioning, are we really mindful about it, and what kind of impact do we have? So culture is, I think, probably the strongest component of our whole process. And another component of this is that we are also ideate camps. They run a compost project every year. We are the largest single contributor to the compost project at over 2,000 pounds or 1,000 kilograms of compost every burn. This number is growing, and we want more camps to participate. And it goes to highlight just exactly how much MOOP we have. And MOOP is all sorts of kinds of things, right? Anything left on playa is MOOP. So what we want to try and do is optimize all the components during build, during the burn, and then during the strike period to make each one of those pieces easier. A component that is important to understand is also the weather. So weather also for planning in terms of what could I bring, glitter and sequins and that kind of stuff, and things that can get blown off, feathers. Another piece is also when you're in the middle of a project, let's say during build or something, and the wind, with a dust storm or something that blows in, how is that going to affect the project and at what stage it's in? So this past year, we had some issues with during the build and strike, we had multiple really large storms, and that significantly contributed to a couple things. Number one is we were not able to put down our tarps in all of our key areas, and build got squished. We lost a build day essentially. And because of that we ended up having a larger MOOP issue at the end of the event. Another component here is we do a full MOOP sweep after the event when everything's packed up, and we walk a line, and normally we have to allocate a significant amount of time to do this. It's a slow process, and so this goes back to our culture about how many people do you have during this process. We had a lot of new virgins this year, and that contributed to the quantity of MOOP that we had pre-playa, well, rather pre-strike, and then it also contributed to the fact that there was a lot more people left during strike before strike was completed this year than prior years. And so what ended up happening was we had just a lot less people. So our entire MOOP process ended up taking us about a day and a half to complete. And again, this is a large area, just trying to put it into size perspective. So not every camp I expect that needs this, but this is where if we can acculturate and teach people prior to coming and play, hey, look, it took us a day and a half last year just to go around picking stuff up. That really helps us explain the fact that how important picking up those little feathers, and while we are asking people to be mindful during the event and also during build. So some techniques we use to mitigate MOOP throughout the event is the first and easiest is just don't bring it. And that means things like taking, all the plastic wrappers and things that come with your stuff you're going to bring, leave it at home, unpack and de-MOOP as many things as you can, and, shake it and that kind of stuff to that way. It just less, we're just not bringing it. If we can avoid bringing it, we don't have to keep track of it. We don't have to burn it, and we don't have to take it off either and then pick it up. Another component is try to anticipate what happens during the dust storms and windstorms, and try to keep an eye out for MOOP that's blowing around. And if you see MOOP, or if you see a camp struggling, go help them. I'm sure they can use it. People have helped us. We've had DPW crews. I think the big component is that we are all a team, and our MOOP doesn't end at the edge of our block, and that's an important piece. Everyone is responsible. So like I said, we all have MOOP bags that we carry around, or a pocket that we dedicate, and that responsibility culture really goes a long way. And we're going to double down on our acculturation and our pre-playa planning for MOOP this year to help bolster that for the new folks that are joining us next year in 2023. Also, one great strategy is to set up and break down fast on a good timeline. That's planned. So that way you can actually have planned time to do MOOPing instead of having to try and fit it in other areas, because that's a major issue. Is like, if you're struggling with build and strike, then something else that ends up getting left behind is the MOOP process and the leave no trace process. So factors that made it challenging this year for our camp was the dust storms created massive chaos. We did not complete our build. Our camp was not even fully decorated when burn week commenced. So what that means is we were all just disheveled and we were tired, and it made the whole process for MOOPing during the burn, as well as also MOOPing afterwards, extremely challenging. Specifically during strike, we got hit with 2 major dust storms, and so therefore we lost strike time, and that strike time caused 2 issues. Because of the timing, we lost people, and people this year was the largest, because there's kind of like an exponential drop off with the number of people that are there after the event. Because we had 2 days of storms, we ended up having so much more time for the few people that were left dedicated to leave no trace and to picking up the MOOP and striking. A lot of our new campers this year, we had so many new campers rather than previous years, our acculturation part could have been better. And so that's a major issue that we're going to focus on moving forward too, is how do we get people plugged in prior? Another issue we had this year was there was a lot of stuff from the Renegade burn that was on our block. And so one thing that we're going to do as a recommendation from from DA and his team, the Resto team, is to actually do a sweep before we start building. And I think that's a really cool thing we're going to apply this year. Another component that is super helpful and also challenging is making sure people's stakes are spray painted and preferably tied off with a ribbon. So that way, it doesn't matter how deep they bury them, if there's a 1 foot ribbon attached or a piece of rope or something, and make sure it's secured tight, then it's very easy to go around and be like, oh, look at that red ribbon, and know that there's a stake somewhere around there. That's a really helpful technique we use, because we probably put thousands of stakes in the ground because we're about half a block. And finally, what are we doing differently this year? Is we are going to double down on a couple of things. So I covered some of them. I'll recap. So we are going to acculturate our new members and get them involved pre-playa. We're doing a lot more pre-playa acculturation this year than we've ever done before. We're investigating something super cool I'm really excited about, which is a dedicated burner express bus for our strike team. Our strike team is huge. And if we can help everyone leave at the same time, rather than this exponential drop off of people randomly leaving and the chaos that creates in terms of how much workforce we have, we're trying to get basically a dedicated burner express bus for Wednesday, sometime on Wednesday strike week. So that way we have an extra 40 people that we know are guaranteed there, and we can really organize that process a lot better. We're also going to implement the Resto test plan using the 37 foot long rope and the exact test that BLM does. We're going to implement that, and we're going to do our own random spot checks, probably throughout the strike week, so that we know exactly how much material, how much effort we're going to have to put into doing the strike. What we're also going to do is we're going to do a metal detector run prior to setting up camp in our village, primarily because we're such a big village. Let's just do a initial check to see what's out there in the beginning. We're also mandating that paint stakes. We're going to set a little paint stake booth so that you can paint your stakes before you deploy them for anyone in the village during build week. And another component that I think it's important, it's not quite what we leave on playa, but it's important to cover, which is Burning Man can be a wasteful event. And I think it's still a net positive event. Overall, the amount of education and things that we're all doing is a global net positive. Although for the event, there's still some net negative things. One of those that we've highlighted this year for us is our food waste. And so I did talk about a little bit of our composting program that's really amazing. And we're going to keep expanding that. Another component is also the food we did not consume. And we're trying to do things like setting up our kitchen in a way and preparing food so we don't end up with a lot of food waste at the end. We are composting a lot. At the same time, there's a lot of food that we just don't end up eating. This year was extremely hot. So we noticed that depending on temperature and temperature at night, food consumption can change by 30%. So we're doing some things to do better with our food consumption and minimizing what's left over after a meal. And the last and final piece is setting up systems where we can donate food and make sure whatever food we're not consuming on playa, rather than throwing it away, how do we get that food into the right hands of someone who can use it on our way off the playa during Exodus and beyond. So thanks so much for listening. And that's what I have.
Thanks, Rocky Road. There are a lot of really amazing nuggets in there, and especially highlighting the importance of acculturating Leave No Trace into our participants, because making the MOOP is not done by just a small number of people. Everyone MOOPs. MOOP is inevitable. How we deal with it is what matters. And Leave No Trace and managing our MOOP should be the responsibility of everyone. And bringing that up as a core part of what it means to go to Burning Man and what it means to be human on Earth is also really important. I want to segue us to Red Bird Bean. Hello, Red Bird Bean. You guys, you and your camp have been burning for a while. But something happened last year. Tell us the story of what happened with your floor.
Yes. So I'm with a camp called Land of Monkey. And we, after we had been away from the pie for a couple of years, one of the things we wanted to focus on was decor and putting some more of our budget towards getting something for our flooring, our communal space, which I think was 30 30 feet by 40 feet. It might have even been longer. And we have campmates in Mexico, and there were artisans that are building these beautiful mats made out of palm leaves. And our campmates have used them at home and they do great. And we questioned if we were going to use that or use plastic or use rugs. And we really wanted to go with something that was natural. We were doing something good for the environment. We wanted to support local artisans. It looks really great. If I can change my virtual background and like, look, it's almost like the same color as the playa. Like it was such a nice vibe. And it just disintegrated. It was way too dry and it just turned into tiny itty bitty little particles. And sometimes they're so small you go to pick it up and actually what you see is a little bit of the shade on like a little crust of playa, and it looks like one of those particles, but it's still just playa. So even when you're picking it up, you're finding more, you think you're finding more, and it was just impossible. So, at first we were like trying to grit it out like foot by foot. Like I'm like, I know this is what they do when things go wrong. And then it was so much you couldn't fix it by gritting it out. And then we're sweeping it, and some people are still gritting, and we're trying to figure out the best way to do it, and all this stuff. And now we're spending more time arguing about how we're supposed to fix it than fixing it. And that's when I was like, you know what? Let's just contact LNT. Let's have them come out here. Like let's phone some support so they can tell us they've done this before. Like the most efficient way to do this, and that we're actually not making it worse when we think we're making it better anyway in the first place. Like we've reached our limit of when you phone a friend. And some people didn't like that idea, right? They're like, well, do we want to put focus on the fact that we're having an issue and then they're going to notice us? And some people were just worried about what that might mean. But I trusted the process because I've watched DA talk about resto. I've seen, I've had friends on the team. And I've seen the videos where people are walking and doing the thing. So another thing that I was saying a lot was, look, if we don't do this now, and we were also, so exhausted, all the things happening. And I was like, if we don't do this now, there's other people who are going to be out here picking up after us. Like we have to do it. We cannot just leave it. But I was able to have more of that drive, I feel, because I had more of the connection to what the next steps were. So I think a lot of the education that we're doing around LNT and that impact is helping. And then what we did end up doing is sweeping up hundreds and hundreds of pounds of playa to have to dump off playa. Just so much playa. And some people took some of that to like make playa art with or something because there were no other options, but like it was a terrible mess. And then even then some people were like, well, we have to use them again because we spent so much money. We spent extra money to get nice flooring that we would use for several years. And I was like, these are never coming back. So that's a great thing of what not to do. Don't bring grass mats. And the other thing too is like, to me, right, I know that plant matter is on the list of things not to bring. But like in my brain, it was now a mat. It was not a plant. Like, so it didn't like equate the same as like if I was bringing a potted plant or something. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then also in terms of what to learn, the other thing that was going on in terms of learning was our LNT lead, was in a car that was leaving earlier than when we got finished with everything. And because we broke down our kitchen early, so we weren't going to have a dinner that night. And so people chose instead of staying, because we had to break things down early to work on the floor, people chose to leave early. So so it was really hard to have the extra effort of having to do so much breakdown and address that issue, that it really impacted the ability of our camp to kind of remain as a unit. And since I've talked to people since this incident, one person suggested if we had had a shop vac or something, maybe that would have made it go a little faster. But we just use good old broom and brush.
Yeah. Thanks, Fred Birdbean. I really appreciate your willingness to talk about this. And I think that, I mean, as you and I were talking through this, I find this completely understandable. You were thinking about how to use some kind of more sustainable material to do flooring. You were supporting local artisans, supporting people who are in the community where your participants come from. And when they use the mats in their local community, they last for years. And so they appear really durable. I hear a lot of elements in your story that Nick also talked about one of the challenges with working with organic material on the playa is that it dries out and then becomes tiny flakes of MOOP. And that isn't necessarily something that we can anticipate unless you've been to the playa and know that this is what happens with stuff. But even then, like, wood can last for years before it starts to turn into tiny pieces of MOOP. Or if it's the wrong kind of wood, it instantly becomes dust. And you guys had a hard lesson this year with your mats, and I really appreciate your willingness to talk about that. You mentioned in your story that when you realized that this was going to be a disaster at Strike, you pulled it up and it was tiny pieces of nothing. You sought out assistance. So most people, I think, don't know that LNT is a department that you can find on Playa and ask for help. How did you know who to ask, and how did you actually get a hold of them?
So we happened to be at a 415 and C, and a lot of service vehicles use C because of the outpost, you know. So there was a car driving by and I noticed that they had radios on. So I just flagged them down and explained what was going on and asked them to call LNT. I mean, I was comfortable doing that because I've also trained as a ranger. And so I felt more comfortable with that. And I also knew there was an LNT department. And I also knew, you know, that we could get to somewhere with a radio. We could go to the outpost at 3, or we could go to center camp, and somebody with a radio could get in touch with somebody who could come out and help us. But somebody just happened to be driving by fast enough, you know, right then.
Yeah. Yeah. Another element of your story that I think is really important to highlight is that you realized that this was going to be something that someone would have to deal with. And if you guys didn't, you and your camp didn't deal with it, then Resto was going to have to deal with it, or it was going to be a much larger problem for other people. And I think this really ties in well with what Darwin was talking about personal responsibility. And I mean, we have to own the LNT and the MOOP issues that we have created, and take it upon ourselves to try to rectify them. And I know that particularly when the MOOP map comes out, or if camps feel like their leave no trace issues are going to impact their standing for placement, then it might lead camps to want to cover things up and pretend like they didn't exist. When really, when we take steps to mitigate some of those MOOP or leave no trace issues early on, they are less likely to become a problem. I know particularly for my camp, we had a leaky box truck for a while. And when we discovered that, it was a lot easier to mitigate when we discovered that on the morning of day 2, as opposed to not noticing until we had already been there for 10 days. That would have been a much greater disaster than when we first discovered that.
I would say the other thing that was nice about calling in LNT is that we were able to have the conversation about what is this?
Yeah.
Because if we hadn't told them and they just stumble upon this mystery, they don't know if they're dealing with tiny pieces of wood. They don't know what they're dealing with. And so we were able to say it's from artisans. And then she was explaining how, like, I'm wearing a straw hat, but it still has some plastic in it to make it work. And able to have the conversation of, like, no, it's really just the palm fronds. It's handmade. Like my campmates like went and watched, like where the people make these things and stuff. Like, they've been there. They're not treated. They're very natural on purpose. But we wouldn't have been able to have those conversations. It might have been more work for them. I don't really know if we helped them out, but they did take baggies away with them to check out what we had done when they did come and check on us.
Yeah. Thank you. And thank you to all of my participants for talking about these things. I know we're all really passionate about this, and sometimes it takes some courage to talk about the things that go wrong for us and for our camps. So I really appreciate that. We have some time for some questions, and I've seen some things pop up in the chat. Action Girl, what do we have on deck for some of our questions?
We've got some good ones. Aslan Goldenhour has a question about burn barrel best practices. The details would be: last year, our camp had barrels that followed these protocols. Number 1, barrels must be raised off the ground with a brick bed, so they didn't leave burn marks on the playa. 2, only burn small wood, cardboard, paper if it was first stripped of all tape and plastic, etc. 3, barrels must be covered with metal mesh to prevent particles from going airborne. Number 4, barrels must be managed only by trained camp members. Aslan wants to know, does that seem reasonable, in line, out of line? They're open to any and all feedback and or tips.
I'm interested if any of our panelists have experience with burn barrels, and I know that we have DA here as well who might be able to talk about this. We've had a fire pit in our camp before. We don't anymore. We've switched to propane instead. But it used to be that we assigned the virgin in camp to clean up the ashes of the fire pit. And then we switched from burning regular wood to burning cut ends of construction material, like regular 2x4. Regular campfire wood tends to sometimes have bark on it, or be a type of wood that is really fine splinters that tend to spark. Sparks equal ashes that sprinkle about your space, and all of those are MOOP, and all of them need to be cleaned up. And if you have ever been the virgin who has to, like, be on their hands and knees cleaning up ashes for hours in the hot sun, it's terrible. So trying to prevent that from happening in the first place is really, really, really helpful. Darwin. Oh, Darwin, you're on mute. There you go. Cool.
I think with burn barrels, we've done them in different size camps, and we've even looked at, we've had a camp before where we created a system where you introduce more air into the burn barrel, so you can burn at a faster rate, you can burn at a higher temperature and be more efficient. You can look at these devices online, you can build incinerators. But at the end of the day, you have to think risk versus reward with all of these things. And what is the risk of having a burn barrel tip over or have a lot of ash go onto the playa? You're just not going to get it up. It's going to go all over the place. It's going to be in your camps, neighbors, as well as we need to think about what would be, burnt in our camp. And the things that are being burnt in our camp outside of, I do think it can be a good way to deal with compost if you have drying racks and you have a very large kitchen. Most of those things are probably materials that could have been pre-cut off playa, could have been unboxed off playa, and could have not come in the first place.
Thanks. DA, and Nick, I see you too.
Hey everybody, always makes me really happy to see like these conversations happening actually without me, and I'm like late to the party, but I just love knowing that it's happening. Back to the burn barrels. Burning paper and cardboard generally is the moopiest thing you could burn in an open fire, because they fly away. Right, you're just watching them fly away, and it's blowing away in this blowable moop, and it's where wood burns so just completely and is just so much better. So generally speaking, it's like, so when we have the burn gardens at the end of the event, people are trying to come at us with all their cardboard and all their paper, and we're like, we are not taking that here. You can go and do that at your camp, but we're not doing that here. But also, we really discourage just paper and cardboard just in general. I think we need to rethink this about what goes into the burn barrels, because I think it's just easy to say, it's like, yeah, you burn it, whatever, you just throw it in the burn. It's a campfire. You start with kindling, and it might be some paper and cardboard, but as a practice to try to unload of our paper and to unload of our cardboard into the fire is just, it's not the best. You've probably seen it already around your camp, and that's generally what makes the MOOP around a fire or a burn platform or something, or like the man base or or when people try to bring tons of paper, like that's not a good idea. So and then two, it's the firewood, so you might have actual like good firewood, right? And then it's like, oh yeah, it's like, oh, you want to make sure that is on a surface like a tarp that is on something. However, like we said, like earlier, when you have a flooring, you have to keep that flooring clean, or else it's just going to get buried by the dust, right? So it's like all those wood chips, so that bark all just keeps shedding and becomes like wood debris. And then when the dust comes, and if it just buries it, and now you're dealing with dusty material churned in with wood debris.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So it's like, if you're sweeping up your tarp with the wood on it, like once a morning, like that's good, because by the end of it, when we are standing in our dust storm and standing in the over the dunes, we have confidence that we've already liberated that MOOP. It's gone. It's not there. Maybe there's a tiny fraction, but guess what? We can deal with the tiniest. We can deal with just a little bit, like, if it's not perfect. We're looking for just big movements, get most of it off. So if you can keep that maintained, that's great. But there's always the person who wants to bring the wood closer to the fire, right? And then they just bring it over. It's like, hey, I brought more fire. And it's like, wood for the fire. And they drop it, and it all just falls right onto the open playa, right next to the burn platform or burn barrel. And then now all that bark is all like really close to the burn barrel. And then now you've got a mess. And then it's like wood chips, wood debris. And this is the reason why we had that whole big Wood is Moot campaign, was just because it's like, just to highlight how complicated wood can get very simply and really quickly. And now people have, like, that awareness is happening, but with those couple of years off, we have a lot of new people who came in. We have a lot of veterans who've left. It's like really important that we really push this acculturation aspect, or else, we're not going to make it. But we've been doing it this whole time, and it's how we got here. We were forged under these conditions in the playa. This is not our first rodeo. We know how to do this, and we're doing it. So anyway, thank you.
Thanks, DA. You really want to underscore, like, don't put your wood directly on the playa, like not in direct contact with the playa. We keep ours in a truck bed covered, so that it also doesn't like blow from there. And particularly if you line your truck bed with a tarp as well before you put your wood on, that keeps the little tiny wood splinters from falling through the cracks in your truck bed also. Yeah. Mr. Wood, Care Bear, I saw you for this. Yeah.
You guys are awesome. You kind of nailed it. I think, yeah, just and DA kind of really highlighted it. Like it just invites the concept that we can like burn our trash, which is paper, and that's just the biggest mess. And so it's kind of like one of those like false sense of, oh, we can dispose of it. And then, yeah, just to really underline, I mean, the playa is the best desiccant I know. And if anyone's like handled firewood in a normal place, like it's like, okay, there's a little bit of like stuff that comes off, like, no, like your bark is going to just completely disintegrate and it's just going to be a disaster. So, I mean, if you're going to burn stuff, you know, one of the things that we do, it's a lot of kind of like offsets from our build, and we kind of make a little art piece every month, you know, I call it the was bought, or we do like a kind of thing where it's a ritual of letting go, and we kind of just piece all of our build stuff together. But I think just burning build materials that are waste, like definitely like high on my vote. And I would say try to just avoid barky wood and don't allow burning of paper and cardboard. Yeah, as Darwin said, just that shouldn't even be coming out here, and there should not even be any kind of implication that you can burn that stuff and it's magically gone.
Thanks. Action Girl, do we have more questions for?
We do.
Great.
Let's hop to another one that's also from Aslan about recycling and compost best practices. Last year, our camp took aluminum to center camp with the following approach: aluminum cans crushed and placed into mesh bags. Mesh bags get biked to center camp for recycling. Awesome. What are the best practices for all flavors of on-playa recycling, including compost, aluminum, or anything else? They did learn about composting at ID8 during the week, but didn't have the infrastructure to really do it properly, so they ended up throwing a lot away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm gonna tap in Rocky Road for this. You guys do a lot with food. How do you prepare your food scraps for compost, either with ID8 or to take off playa?
Sure. I'll first say that food is tough.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it comes back to culture, because, and I will defer to the rules for food to ideate, or to whoever your composter is, because the types of compost and what can be composted change. If you use a commercial composter, they can take more things than you're like, let's say you're going to put it into your garden kind of backyard composting kind of system. So the food in general needs to be the plastic labels, plastic containers, all the plastic has to be removed. Another component is what happens is when the food, if you put it into a barrel, the food starts to, as it decomposes, especially on playa with the heat, it starts to turn into liquid, and there's a lot of excess liquid. So what you can do is you can use a fiber compost sack, and you can put the compost in there, and then you can basically put it on top of like a metal rack and allow it to drip into a waste container, and that will allow you to get rid of most of the water over time. And then the second thing you can do is take that compost and mix it with wood chips, or mix it with, for instance, ID8 normally has wood chips and some carbon to absorb the excess moisture. Or you can also just let it air dry, depending on how much compost you have. If you have a small amount of compost, putting it on a tarp, letting it air dry is super easy. For us, we have a huge amount of compost. Every day we're generating probably 50 gallons of compost, so we have to do things a little differently. If anyone has any questions, feel free to contact me. We're always improving our system, and we're trying to make a system that we can also easily share and deploy with other larger camps, and kind of basically help ideate to do more composting on playa in general. So totally open to collaborating on any of that. Does that help?
Yeah. Aslan, follow-up question?
Yeah, and the sad emoji was a total accident. So I'm curious, do you invite camps to bring compost to ideate, or is it generally like, the recommendation to like compost within the camp? Or I was curious if ideate was running like a sort of apply wide compost similar to like aluminum recycling.
Yeah, so Ideate is running a compost project. They have I think it's a 50-yard dumpster that's closed. They have strict requirements though. So there needs to be no liquid, and there are very strict requirements regarding any kind of contaminants. Paper towels can also be considered a contaminant. So the rules change slightly every year. So just make sure you double check with Ideate's latest requirements. But overall, things like paper towels, and we get a lot of banana plastic wrappers. Some of them are compostable, some are not, and some are only commercially compostable. So that, and Ideate does not take commercially compostable materials. So even if it says on the bottom of the container, I think I have one right in front of me, even if it says compostable, does not necessarily mean Ideate can take it. That's a little interesting tip.
And Care Bear posted a link to the Ideate requirements in the chat, which is awesome. Yeah. We take our compost home all the way to Seattle. Same with some of our recycling stuff. Here in Seattle, paper towels are acceptable for recycling, or for composting, I mean. So that might be an option for absorbing the liquid that comes from desiccating and decomposing your edible waste. But it really depends on how long, like where you're going to be composting or where you're going to be recycling. Like, check your local requirements. If you are going to be disposing of your recycling or your trash or your compost somewhere between Black Rock City and wherever home is for you, please do it through one of the programs that Burning Man talks about for how to dispose of your recycling and trash responsibly. Tie down your load as you are leaving the playa, please. And utilize one of those local programs for your trash and recycling. Action Girl, I think we have more questions maybe. Yeah.
We do. There was one question also from Aslan. What is the 37-foot rope thing? And
Yeah.
that was answered with a link in the chat.
Yeah. And
I don't know
DA
if a
talked
description is due there.
Yeah.
But you pasted some information there, DA. Is there anything else you want to say about it, or is that a summary?
No, the inspection is it's a really good method, actually. It's always really surprising. Managing resto, it's like, I can be really confident in an area. I'm looking around and you're just walking around and it looks like there's nothing there. But the second you put that stake into the ground and you tie off that 38-foot rope and you walk in a circular radius and you move within that area, all of a sudden you see all these things pop out. And I think maybe it's because we really focused on a smaller area and we're in the same area, but in a circular way. And also you're seeing light at a different, the light is hitting at different angles, which is actually pretty clutch for MOOP. For playa restoration, when they're mooping along the sweeps, it's like whatever the sun was that day, that's where it was, so it's much harder, we might turn around or something like that. But just putting that stake in the ground, tying off that 30-foot rope, you're going to see stuff, and there's always going to be you're always going to see stuff. That's just the way it is. Now whether it adds up to 1 square foot per acre, that's another story. But it's a good gauge. It's a good test. It's a good way for us to test ourselves. So mapping out our own MOOP maps per camp is going to be huge. And it's like, this way we can all just talk about the same thing. And we just know, it's like, I have to manage all of restoration, like all of Black Rock City. And I know it's like, the man base is always going to take a hit. The temple's going to take a hit. There's places that I know are going to take a hit, but I know it's there and I'm ready for it. You know, so when we know our camps and our operations, what's going on there, it's like whether you're having a compost operation in your camp or whether it's you're just having a party and a dance floor and whatever, it's like it's good to know what the hit is going to be and to be ready for it.
Mhm.
So testing ourselves and testing those areas are great. And yeah.
And DA, if maybe you can chime in about some of the common places that people might focus on for MOOP. I think I would start with like kitchen and food scraps, particularly from cooking, tend to be high areas for MOOP. Particularly if I would encourage having your camps think ahead about the types of things that you're cooking, like rice, couscous, like other types of food that are like little bits, maybe not so much for the playa, or putting down some kind of tarp in your kitchen area for that. Places where people are parking are also high areas for potentially leaving something in the playa with fuel spills, also fuel containment. If you have fuel in your camp or you're using fuel in your camp, and then high traffic areas for people, like DA said, dance floor, bike parking, some of those areas. DA, what other areas might you suggest that people target their MOOP eyes towards?
Oh, I think I want to like pull back and go back to the big picture. When you're looking at the entirety of Black Rock City, that is the Pentagon, right? And then you see the city grid, which is, you know, like right here, right? When you see this, the city grid is like, I don't even know, maybe 100 times more likely to have MOOP there than the rest of the playa. Not that there isn't any, but it's where we live. It's because it's so dense and concentrated, and we were there for a week or 2 weeks or maybe 3 weeks, depending on like the infrastructure. You're there for a long time. And so that's where everything's happening. The work's happening, then the play is happening. We're jumping up and down, and basically, Burning Man, if you can imagine MOOP, is more, it's debris. It's less about, oh, somebody left a couch at my camp, or how come, you know, what about the bicycles? It's like, that's gone. We've dealt with that. All right. Big to small. Now we're talking about what can fail us at 1 square foot per inch. And it's debris. So if you can imagine all of Burning Man just shoved into a blender, and then you just sprinkle like that out into like liberally around Black Rock Desert. That's what MOOP is. That's what we're finding. In playa restoration, we're kind of like this archaeological CSI team where we're just kind of cold reading the playa. You know, there's probably some psychic activity going on too, but we're like, oh, we're in the kitchen. We're in the bar. Like, there's an orange peel, here's a lemon, you know, whatever. It's like, here's a bottle cap. It's like we're reading the playa. And this is the result of that. But MOOP is so much more granular. It's really, so if you imagine your camp thrown into a blender, what happened at the camp? Well, just throw it in a blender and toss it around your camp. And that 1%, think about it, in 1% is what we still have to find. So it's like the advantage is you all know your area. Know what it is, anticipate it, and then we're going to talk afterwards, and we're going to have like, this conversation is actually going to be fun, so I'm looking forward to like when we're able to just talk, and like it's like I'm meeting like-mindeds. We're all on the same team. We get to talk about MOOP and just what it is in support of the big greater thing, is the great disappearing city trick, right? This 1 week city flash mob that we build, and then we make it go away and look like it never happened, and that's the thing about welcoming people to our community, Black Rock City, or our community, insert camp name here, but it's like, hey, welcome to Black Rock City. It's like, here we leave no trace, and like, make sure that they know this, because this is our community that we want to grow old with, right? Because I want to grow old and like long white hair by the fire, and know that the future Black Rock City is still in good hands. So the better we teach these kids coming in now, the more we ensure our future.
I could not sum it up any better than that. I really, really appreciate that we're like right up on that time, and like the mods are gonna kick us out in just a minute, but like, thank you to my panelists for being here today to talk about your pieces. Thank you, DA, for contributing your knowledge and experience here with us. And very similarly, look forward to continuing this talk with you, you all, over the next many years, and hopefully to see you on Playa. We have a feedback form for our breakout sessions. Action Girl just dropped it into the chat. If you would like to connect with any of our participants, drop your messaging in if you need to. And I hope to see you in one of our future sessions, potentially maybe our campfire talk on April 23rd or May 20th. Thank you all. We'll see you in the next breakout room. DA's got office hours coming up next if people want to continue this conversation about MOOP. See you all in the dust.